Welcome to the Roniel and DaRon podcast show. I'm Roniel.
I'm DaRon.
And, I don't know. I always got to ask you about some movies, but I don't know. Did you ever see that Snake Eye movie?
Maybe.
That came out last week? It was not what I was expecting. It did not go with the original origin story. And plus, the camera sucked. I don't know what they were trying to do. It was a different angle, but it was not great at all. The fighting was okay more than you get to, from an origin story. But, man, I was disappointed with the Snake Eye movie. I thought I was going to get some real good fighting in there and some good ninja stuff because I'm a ninja fan, I'm a ninja. But that did not actually work out. But I do say people should go see it anyway. There's no spoilers here, but you should go see it if you like ninja stuff. I'm also thinking about going to see Jungle Cruise with The Rock.
I am going to see that. That is going to be fantastic. That man does. His movies are funny, which is what you need. They're funny. They're lighthearted. They're enjoyable. Yeah.
And him and Kevin Hart are crazy together.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
It's crazy together.
I know he was in that last Jumanji that they did.
It was hilarious.
That whole one was fantastic that they switched the voices on
Yeah.
Oh, it was beautiful. That must have been at least I would have thought that would have been very difficult because you as the actor, you have to sit there and talk out this stuff and then they're going to do a voiceover. So you have to time the movement. I mean, that's good.
That was one of my favorite movies with The Rock. Besides, even though people don't like Fast 9, I do like the Fast 9 series with, Hobbs and Shaw. So, I mean, yeah, it got a little ridiculous, but I do sometimes I just like what they bring to it to get you out of that element. But I do think they need to go back to being realistic, But either way, I just, always got to pick you about what movies you may have saw and if you didn't see or did see movies. And, I'm a movie person. But let's go for the topic of the day, which can be a controversial topic. And I think we need to discuss this. So I would like to discuss a little bit more about Russia and in different countries and their cybersecurity posture, and their tactics and how did they get where they are? So some people don't really understand, where China and Korea and all these places stand when it comes to cybersecurity and attacks and how complex they may be, if they're even complex. And I think we need to have a discussion about that because I think people are misguided from what they may see on the internet or what they think they're seeing is from an IOC perspective. But I would like to talk about that because I know you know a lot about that.
Sure. So I guess let's start with some of the history. As far as recent history is concerned, you had two behemoths in the room, of course. You had the United States on one side, the Soviet Union on the other side. This was in the 80s. And honestly, most of that took place not via computers, but it was more of a crypto war. More than anything. Obviously, the DoD, etc., they did have protections, basic protections. There was a little bit of that fighting, but it wasn't really until the 1990s that it became a real big deal. When the Soviet Union collapsed, you had a lot of individuals who were incredibly skilled at mathematics. So the Soviet Union focused their education on mathematics for very, very many decades. Mathematics. So they were very good at cryptography. They were very good at cryptology, period. Okay. Soviet Union collapses, and all of a sudden you have these just a slew of mathematicians completely out of a job. Okay, the economy's gone to hell, and it's just a bad time in general. So what rose out of that was Russian organized crime. Now, I say they rose out of it. They'd already been around, but this is where they start to really rise to prominence because Russian organized crime, while they're not necessarily the most ingenious group compared to, for example, the Italian mafia, which was very quick in moving to legitimate business, tainting unions and all of that good stuff, moving away from the brute or brutish methods to ones that are less so, more white collar crime than anything. The Russian mob has not historically done that. So they'll realize that they could take all of these mathematicians, very good cryptologists, and they could start putting them to work. And the way they started doing this, of course, was through cybercrime. So they were one of the first ones to really capitalize on the idea that they could make massive amounts of money and gain a lot of power through cybercrime. And as a result, Russian organized crime was way ahead of the curve. You're talking early 2000s. They were the ones who created ransomware. They were the ones who pushed ransomware first on everyone who was unfortunate enough to have been a member of what had been the Soviet bloc, whether or not they wanted to be a member, right? And then, of course, all the states that spun off as the Soviet Union collapsed. So those guys were all the guinea pigs of this Russian, if you will, sharpening their teeth, really getting good at cybersecurity from an attacker perspective. And that is important. We're really talking about an attacker perspective at this point. And so when you look at it, your most sophisticated attacks are going to be coming from only a few places: the United States, Russia, Turkey, and believe it or not, Iran. Okay.
So can we just a second? So United States, like a lot of people think that United States is behind, and I'm not saying that we aren't in some ways, but if we're one of those that are, pretty much the heavy hitters, then why do people have this concept that we're not even in the talks? I mean, I know that because we're getting attacked a lot, but it's not like other countries are not being attacked at the same time. You just don't hear a lot about it.
Okay, so there's a lot to this, and it's very complicated, and it gets very, very complex very quickly. There are a few different things to keep in mind. First and foremost, a lot of the negativity is coming from groups that are trying to obtain more money. So how do you obtain more money? You have to create a crisis. Whether or not there is a crisis, you have to create it. So you'll see, for example, the DoD puts out press releases saying how we would lose against China in this war or that war. I will tell you, as someone who has lived in that region, who is very aware of the culture and who knows a lot about the history, et cetera, languages and all of this good stuff. If China were where the US military likes to claim and where politicians like to claim, either as far as cybersecurity is concerned or as far as the military is concerned, China would have moved already on Taiwan and Japan. They haven't, which tells you a lot. But these organizations, I mean, the United States' military is massive. It's so massive, it's not funny. And we could talk about, oh, well, China has more people, the million-man army kind of deal, but its people are conscripts. Most of China's military are conscripts. If you know nothing else, no, conscripts make bad soldiers, and conscripts also make for a very unstable military. Because maybe they're good this year, but the batch you get next year are bad. And the batch that you had from 2 years ago that was really good, well, their time is over, so they're done. And now they're unleashed upon the world being, good little civilians. This is why the United States military is so big on volunteer. And if you look at it, the United States military has for a very long time resisted drafts. They don't want drafts. It doesn't work well. People who are drafted in general don't make good soldiers, sailors, Marine, or airmen and airwomen. They just don't. Actually, the Air Force only uses airmen. I don't know if you knew that. They don't have airwomen.
Yeah. I know.
Well, it doesn't cause a problem in the Air Force. At least it historically hasn't. Everyone I've ever known sat there, then male and female, they took pride because they understood what it really meant. Anyway, all of that aside, because I will get burned at the stake if I continue this conversation.
No, because I say it could make a difference to certain people, but I think that really, if you really look at it in between the lines, to me, it makes similar. It's the same thing to me.
Well, it's like how they used to have the Black Army Corps and then the, please don't take offense to this, regular Army Corps, No,
I get it.
When you get segregated off like that, I mean, separate but equal is not a real thing. We already figured that out, right? It doesn't exist. You can't be separate but equal. And that's part of the military's thinking is it's supposed to be unit cohesion. So if we split the two, if we say, okay, well, we have airmen and airwomen, and we have, I don't know, you can't do that with soldiers, Marines. Marines and soldiers and sailors are all neutered. But the thinking is that if you do that, then you now create separate, and that breaks up unit cohesion. It's brilliant. I mean, we no longer call them the Buffalo. We don't have a Buffalo Soldiers division anymore. We got rid of them. We don't have a Black Army Corps anymore. We got rid of it. We integrated, and so now, I mean, it's just the Army. It's just the Marine Corps. It's just the Air Force, so on and so forth. Anyway, all of that aside, so it's funny because when you look at all of this stuff, obviously the United States military, every time there's a budget cut, the personnel actually make up only a tiny bit of the military's budgets. When there's a budget cut, it's usually toys that go away. Actually, hypothetically, it would be toys that go away. It's really military housing that suffers, and benefits and things like that for spouses, etc. But we'll play the game and say the toys go away, and the military doesn't want that. So they have to have a boogeyman, right? Now we see the same thing in cybersecurity. You have all these people who, we're under this constant siege and we're in so much trouble. We need more money so we get more bodies. And it's true, we do have an actual shortage. We discussed that a little bit. Some of this is self-inflicted, caused by the whole contractor and all this good stuff. And the way that the government and corporate entities now do so much of their cybersecurity, contracting it out. That creates a self-inflicted, artificial problem. But they still want to further it by having this boogeyman, because if all you have is this, well, we need to bump up the numbers and how many professionals we have, then we have to have a good cause, a good reason. And that's where they create this boogeyman of China, because the Russian government isn't stable enough and doesn't have the influence that it had. So rightly or wrongly, many people have written Russia off. I would say it's wrongly. And as a result, you have China has to rise up as our new competition, and we have to disparage current U.S. cybersecurity, because if we don't disparage them, if we don't say, oh no, they're bad, then we can't demand more funding and personnel. So these two things have to come together. And it's odd because you have to juxtapose the idea of being a jingoist, a nationalist, someone who says, my country's the best, and you have this militaristic, hawkish fervor about you, with the idea of, at the same time, we want more money. So what do we have to do? Well, we have to create a boogeyman, this artificial thing. And this artificial thing is going to be what we now have everyone concerned about, and enter China. And that's both militarily and cybersecurity wise. The truth is, we don't need an artificial boogeyman as far as cybersecurity is concerned, because we do have very prominent forces that do sap a lot of energy from the various cybersecurity folks. So we do have Russia, which makes incursions that people don't talk about. And their incursions are far greater than what China does. It's like one person sat there and said in a news interview that China compromised 30,000 systems that they didn't have to compromise just to assert their dominance.
There's no reason they needed to hack 30,000 systems. This was definitely a sign of dominance in the cyber realm. And they're really testing our capabilities, our responses, and what we're going to do from that side. And it's pretty concerning. China happens to be one of the largest, threats when it comes to a cyber warfare perspective. And right now, we really have to focus on policy and what that means from an offensive perspective and defending our country. It's all going to be things that we need to kind of formulate and plot, but we're pretty far behind right now, unfortunately.
And I'm going, well, if that's the case, then Russian cybersecurity, Iranian Skript kiddies, and Turkish Skript kiddies must be like gods because they compromise millions of systems. They don't have to. Hundreds of millions of systems.
I mean, it's just to say that they could.
Yeah.
You know, that's really all that is. So it's like, what do you mean?
Right. It's absolutely ridiculous. Most compromises aren't because someone has to compromise the system. In most cases, they're compromising a system because they want to compromise something. You know?
Yeah, it was an oxymoron. Like, I didn't get it. Like that, and I read that article and it didn't make any sense. And I'm like, why? You know, why that doesn't make sense at all. So again, this is why I said I think that people need a little bit more education on this, on where the power lies as far as if you're talking about who has the better attacks or better skill set. Now, I want to come back to this, but I actually want to ask you something that will go and tie into all of this. And it was something that was asked to me a while ago that ties into this. Now, you talked a little bit about Russia and, you know, how they became the most dominant. But can you, due to your history knowledge, can you maybe discuss a little bit more about the origins of hacking? Because everybody has this, this ideal that the U.S. was the first to do things, which goes back into our topics of everybody wants some, their race or their country to be the first to do something. And I'm not saying, so due to what you know, can you discuss a little bit where the origin may have been, and then we can tie it into going back to why things are so dominant where they are.
So that's really complicated. If we think about it, for the most part, hacking is merely intercepting or putting out electronic signals with some point or purpose, generally to compromise someone else's data, right? So if I'm able to cut into your phone line and then listen in on everything you say, I mean, arguably that's as good a genesis as any, right?
Yeah, same thing, right? Yeah.
Right. And if that's the case, really, World War I, that came in full swing. Of course, people were reading intercepts, radio intercepts before then. But World War I, it came into full swing. But that was largely unencrypted communication. And so that's kiddie stuff. Anyone can cut a line and then splice together some wires. And that's really what was going on. You see World War II come about, and credit where credit is due. I mean, the British were freaking awesome when it came to breaking codes. Absolutely awesome. I don't think I need to remind everyone who I'm going to say grandfather and godfather of much of computer technology, let alone cryptography, is. And that poor man doesn't get as much credit as he deserves. Alan Turing was absolutely phenomenal, and he was an important part of this process. And I would argue that Alan Turing's work, and of course his team's work, was definitely one of the biggest genesis of what we should consider hacking today. Yes, cryptology has existed for millennia, actually many millennia. We have recordings of that in ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, so on and so forth. And there's a reason why they had different systems for encrypting data. But to be able to do that with encrypted radio communications nearly on the fly, in very short order, is amazing. Absolutely amazing. Of course, it helps when you steal some Enigma machines, right?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? But the reason why I asked this is because, if you read some things online, you go back to that train station where hacking started. And that's what you really get. You don't get much information about where it really, began. And I know that back then, and especially in the wars, that's where you start to see all of these interceptions and stuff. But a lot of people go back that don't know. They think about the train station thing, and I can't remember all of it. It's to date in memory, but all I know is that these people at MIT train station, they were hacking things, and this is where it started, and people started what I'm saying. So I really want people to understand, especially from these episodes, to learn the history about things before you actually say things and you don't know the facts. That's a big thing, a common thing that I always have to tell people. You have to know the facts before you can actually speak them. You can speak your opinion and all that, but if you don't have the facts to back it up, then your opinion means nothing. So that's kind of why I wanted to talk a little bit more about where it started, and then start putting the pieces together on why certain countries are dominant the way they are. And it has to go back to, especially with science and cryptography and all of these different things, but that all happened in the war also.
Yes.
So
yes, well, you're exactly right. You had, of course, World War I, World War II. You had in between the two, where, of course, cryptanalysis was going on, all this good stuff, and the United States was breaking Japanese ciphers and so on and so forth. And then you have the Cold War. And everyone talks about the bulletin boards in the 1980s. Oh, well, hacking and the bulletin boards. That was great. But hacking existed before then. It's just it was nation state stuff for the most part. Because nation states were the ones who had all of the equipment, and nation states were the ones who had something people actually wanted. MIT, no. It was around long before MIT. And anyone who says otherwise has never heard of espionage and clearly does not understand any of that kind of stuff. Honestly, it's ridiculous on the face of it to make that claim. It has been around for a very, very, very long time, and it will continue to be around for a very, very long time. But the United States, arguably, I would definitely say, if you were to sit there and have to pin it on a map, I would say hacking from the current understanding, if we're going to exclude Turing's work and breaking of all of those radio intercepts, things of that nature, both by the United States and its allies, and by, of course, the Axis, then I would push it a little further and start saying, well, you're talking the 1950s and 60s with what your spies and spy agencies were doing, both on the Russian side and on the United States and its allies side. But it's definitely not tied to MIT. It's not tied to this mythical culture on university campuses and all of that other baloney. That's just fantasy malarkey, which is typical of Western thinking.
But is that did the term, we know from espionage is different, but did the term hacker come actually from that era of the MIT era? Because, people started trying to put a name on something and define something. Was it really being called, like, I'm not saying hacking, but the term hacker during the war? I don't think nobody gave a crap about whether it was a hacker or was hacking or any of that. But do you think that term came out, especially the negative term, came out from that era?
The negative term came out more from the media than from anything else. What happened was the media misconstrued and misunderstood what the technical community was saying when they used the term hacker. And then they started misapplying it to malicious actors. And
then the new term cracker?
Right, yeah.
Well, I didn't like that at all. I thought that was just horrible. Around that time, I was just like, what is this? You might as well just keep it hacker, not cracker. But,
yeah. And of course, we had the whole freaking thing.
Oh, yeah. Like, that's a little weird right there. It's a little bit of freaking.
Yeah.
I don't know. Back to the topic at hand. I just was kind of wondering, just to give, some, just basically to give some people that may not understand where this came from, or other individuals that think that this is still from that era, that it, where it came from.
I'll tell you what, if if you aren't more afraid of Russian organized crime and the Russian nation state than you are the Chinese or Koreans, then you have no clue what you're talking about or doing. And yes, Russian organized crime is big on your whole Monero and Bitcoin and all of that good stuff right now, but they do a lot more. They just don't talk about it, and you don't hear about it.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the topic of you talking about earlier, especially on LinkedIn, about the Chinese and that topic you had with that individual. Can you explain a little bit more about what you were going into?
Yeah, sure. So I had a gentleman who I don't actually know, but he had connected. I don't know what it's called in LinkedIn terms.
Connections?
Yeah, he'd connected with me. And so he was posting that China, in fact, was surpassing the United States and all of this other stuff. Militarily, cybersecurity wise, so on and so forth. And so I've worked on military weapons platforms, the R&D side of it, and otherwise, and have a lot of history and work with the military, as well as, of course, cybersecurity and so on and so forth. And I can speak with great authority on both matters. And I've lived in Asia, right? I know what the Chinese military is. I know what they're like. I know how they work. And this gentleman was saying that they beat us in everything. And I said, well, no, that's not true. The Chinese, yes, they've made great strides, but they've made great strides because of theft, right? So the Chinese, of course, had a big campaign, two major campaigns. Corporate espionage, and that was done, and of course, governmental espionage, and that was done by convincing organizations to send all their recycling over to China. And what they would do is, if it was paper, they would read it. If it had been shredded, they'd reconstruct it. If it were something other than paper, for example, maybe it's a prototype or something like that, maybe it's plastic, metal, whatever, they would then take it apart, and figure out what the thing did. They have entire departments dedicated to this and only this. So the Chinese are pretty good at it. And so the other way that they've managed to get data is through going through and flipping people. And the way they flip them is twofold. Either one, bribery, or two, pushing the ancestry thing. And this may sound ugly, but you can talk to any FSO that's field security officer, and they will tell you this is true. If you are of Chinese descent, even if it's many generations back, the Chinese government will attempt to use that to convince you to spy on their behalf and hand over data. That's just how they work. And that's fine. I mean, if that works for them, great. Anyway, this gentleman then started disagreeing rather vehemently. He claimed that I had done nothing more than use rhetoric, which is absurd. I didn't use any rhetoric. And then he posted up a DoD link, actually from the Air Force, talking about how the Air Force had run this this war game, and China won. Okay. In the war game, China unleashed biological weapons, and they magically win. I, of course, responded by saying that's not true. China has a real problem because they lack critical thinking. And this is actually a fact. The Chinese government has said this, and they've said this repeatedly. And this is part of the reason why China's cybersecurity is behind our cybersecurity. And that's both offensive and defensive. So for the Chinese, they have a few different pressures. You have, of course, Maoism, and then you have very deep cultural roots that prevent the general Chinese population from doing what Westerners would consider critical thinking. And part of that is you're not allowed to speak up. If you speak up, then you get ostracized. And that is true in all of the collectivist cultures within Southeast Asia, China, Japan, and Taiwan, as well as, of course, both Koreas, as well as other nations. There's a saying in Japan, actually, they have a number tied to this, but the nail sticking up is the one that gets hammered. They're big on conformity, uniformity. We talk about that in another episode a little bit, when we talk about some of the absurd claims that some people have made recently about China, or where Japan has had its influences. But this, I posted, of course, some links from Chinese academics who were stating this, from a few different governments, Rand Corporation, so on and so forth, all that showed that no, China was in fact quite far behind. And I got blocked. I was blocked on LinkedIn as a result of this. I actually was very cordial as these things go, particularly since, honestly, he was insulting in the beginning, particularly claiming that I had done nothing more than given my opinion and rhetoric, which is, whatever. I mean, sure, whatever. And it's funny. Please.
But this is the thing, like, while he was going through that, did he actually do a fact check? You know, like, before I would ever have a conversation or go that far with somebody, I would have to, one, know who you are, what you've done, and then, read up on things. Or even if you said something that I didn't understand, it's okay to say you don't know it. And that's the problem with the IT. The tech or cybersecurity, whatever, is a problem here. Is that everybody wants to be that guy. And it's okay. Not everybody can be that guy. It's okay. It's okay. You got to learn from somebody. And you can't always be that guy. And, I just think it'd be better if people just say, I don't know. And thank you. Thank you for, teaching me something. Because I didn't know that. Instead of doing that, this person really got mad and then just blocked you, right? Because they felt that, maybe you don't know what you're talking about, or maybe you do know what you're talking about, which you do. And that was a learning moment.
Yeah.
And that goes back to something I wanted to say about people in the industry, period. They think because you go to another level, whether it's principal or a senior manager or this and that, or doesn't matter what you are, that doesn't mean that you stop learning, and that doesn't mean that you're over other people. I still have that saying, that just because you're a black belt doesn't mean you can't learn from your students. Right. It can't mean you don't. That doesn't mean you can't learn from a white belt or anything. And that's my biggest problem that I see here, is that he didn't want to hear what you had to say. He didn't care. He had his own belief, and he didn't take a teaching moment. And instead of actually saying, hey, maybe you're right. I don't know. And thank you. And then he could have learned more things. And we've seen that with people at Highland.
Right.
I don't get it. And they should take that as a learning lesson.
It's a sign of maturity, or I should say immaturity in this particular case. So
yeah,
we can easily get into a discussion and walk away both agreeing to disagree. And that's okay, because sometimes the right or wrong answer is not, there's that gray zone, right? But at least you would have had genuine discourse where both participants spoke, both participants listened, and both participants heard each other, maybe learned a little bit. And I think, unfortunately, in the current culture, it's too easy to shut off discourse. You can easily block someone. You can easily just go through and let's say use Anonymous or some other organization and do a denial of service against someone just because you don't agree with what they said. But did you actually take the time to listen and understand where they came from? And a good example is, so you and I, very early on in our relationship, were seated in a cafeteria and we were talking about our experiences with police, right?
Yeah.
Now imagine how the conversation would have gone if you had walked into it thinking that you'd had it the worst that anyone could have it, and I walked into it thinking I'd had it the worst anyone could have it.
It would not have been great.
No.
And we would both be going back and forth, and nobody's listening to each other. Not saying that that's what you would do, but
in this scenario, that's exactly what would have happened, right?
Right. And in that case, again, even if we both had, and I didn't even know you had it that bad, but I can't make assumptions, and the whole idea is to understand where you're coming from.
Right.
So you can understand where I'm coming from, and then you kind of get to know that we're not too different.
Right.
We may have different experiences, but we're not too far off.
That's exactly right. And the important thing in this particular case was we were having a discussion. I presented a slew of academic and think tank and news articles that disputed the claim. And maybe what should have happened was a reevaluation of sources. Now, look, there's nothing wrong with ignorance, and this is absolutely positively important. There is nothing wrong with ignorance. Everyone is ignorant about something. Ignorance means you don't know because you can't know because you shouldn't know. There are a lot of reasons for that. Maybe this gentleman was new. Maybe this gentleman didn't have military experience. Maybe this gentleman was only in for 4 years. And I'll tell you, there's a marked difference between being in for 4 years and being in for 16, 20, so on and so forth. Talk with a lifer, and you will find their experience is incredibly different. You don't learn culture in 4 years, not culture as deep and as vast as the military's. And you don't understand something as simple as why the U.S. military would sit there and say, oh no, China's catching up, or oh no, China has surpassed us. And if you don't think about the ulterior motives, understanding the culture and understanding the way that the budgets work and so on and so forth, you wouldn't think, well, the reason why the U.S. military says this is because they want either to continue to have a large budget or to have their budget expanded. Because if they said, oh, no, we've got this, we could manhandle whomever 3 times over, then what would you do? The budget would shrink.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with being ignorant of that fact. I'm ignorant of tons of things. You're ignorant of tons of things. That's okay. Yeah. There's a difference between ignorance and stupidity. Stupidity is where you were ignorant, you either were informed or should have been informed, and you purposefully blinded yourself from that. That's stupidity. If you didn't know, you didn't know. That's okay. That's why we have discussions. That's why we have schools. That's why we have universities. That's why we all have mentors to guide us through our careers, both technical mentors and non-technical mentors. But the problem is now you have this very big culture of I have to be an expert on everything. Well, here's the thing. Anyone who knows me knows, in general, I'm not going to talk about something if I don't feel that I know a lot about it. If I don't feel like I can really contribute to whatever this discussion is, I'll just stay out of it. I will stay silent. When I talk, that means it's something I care about and something I know about. And does that mean I'm right? No. But that definitely means I'm going to at least come in informed enough that
to have that conversation.
Exactly. And we can have it like adults. And that's the important thing here. LinkedIn is supposed to be for adults. And if you're going to be a jingoist and say all this doom and gloom stuff while at the same time trying to buttress up the United States, which is an odd, really cognitive dissonance, then I'm going to call you out on it when you're wrong. Now, if you were right and China were surpassing us, that'd be one thing. But like I pointed out, China's issue with being unable to really think creatively is so systemic that it's going to take them generations, meaning decades, to truly correct. And up until that point, China will continue to be relatively stagnant and behind the United States and Russia and others, because all that they can do right now is steal from the United States and Russia and others, and they don't create much. I'll give you actually a really good story from my college days. So I made good friends with one of my professors, and we were over at this individual's house, and the individual was my family and this individual's family. And the individual told my wife and I that they had a PhD student who wasn't ready, but the visa was up on this particular student, so they were going to have to go back to China. And so this individual student was going to be passed and get a, can't stress this enough, PhD in computer science from a very good college, by the way. Even though all the professors on the board knew the individual wasn't ready, simply because, and I quote you, I couldn't do that to someone. That thing being send them home sans a visa. I mean, sans a PhD, sans a degree, just because their visa had expired. Well, this individual had how many years to go through and get that PhD? And quite frankly, if you take 7 years to get a PhD, you've done something wrong. It should take you less than that. But to run out of time and then give the person a PhD does a great disservice. Now, this individual was from China, and part of the problem was this person could not think critically. They had no creative thinking, and it just wasn't happening. Everything that they did was regurgitation of everything that they were told. And that is very common across all of China. And there are a lot of cultural reasons for it. We could spend a very long time discussing why. But you cannot take away from the fact that they have a very dictatorial regime where your family and friends, similar to Nazi Germany, will rat you out if you say something that doesn't toe the party line. And when that occurs, you will disappear. Not only you, but your family will disappear. And in many cases, your extended family will disappear. And they won't be heard from again. And we've seen that time and time again in the news, right? All these millionaires who just disappear. And then they send some letter to some news agency saying, oh, no, I'm fine. Or they have some clearly scripted video come out. Oh, I'm perfectly fine. I've just been on vacation.
Yeah, sure you have.
Yeah. But see, that's the problem. That's the thing that we're dealing with is we have a lot of people, unfortunately, who don't understand all of this stuff, and they want to be that guy. As you said, they want to be that guy. They want to be right, and they want to always be right. And it's okay to be wrong. I've been wrong on plenty of things. And that's how you learn. Actually, one of the biggest ways for me to learn is from being wrong.
You learn from your mistakes, so you won't make a mistake again.
Yes.
Or make mistakes of others.
Yes.
And I would rather, especially when you're talking about hiring somebody who's supposed to be a security professional or a professional in general, I would rather you say you don't know something than to tell me you know everything or you know something, because nobody knows everything. Nobody can be an expert at everything.
Right.
And if you say you're an expert in this field, then I know that you're lying. There's no possible way. I mean, as we talk, I don't really like to just, how should I say it? I don't really like to pretty much specialize in just one thing, because I feel like once you specialize in one thing, that's something you get stuck into.
Right.
But I do feel like that, there are people that may specialize in a particular, subject, and that's fine. But you can't say that even in that subject, you may not know everything. There's going to be things you don't know about that subject. But as long as you have your facts and you research and, when you're talking about that subject, you're going to know about it. Like you said, you're not going to talk about something you don't know.
Right.
And obviously, to me, this person didn't do their research or didn't do enough research. And they got it from maybe not an credible source.
Right. Well, so exactly to that point, you'll have a fair number of individuals, and this all goes back to what we talked about before about being able to abstract knowledge, and that's part of being able to think critically. It's part of also being creative, right? So I don't have to know minutia of everything. I just have to know in general how enough things work, and then specifics where I need to know specifics. I can derive the specifics from these basic principles. It's like when we talk science. So you have, of course, laws, and then you have theories, and then you have stuff. Now, your theories are derived from laws. So if you know your laws, then you can extract from them your theories, and that's in general how that's supposed to occur. We see in IT, computer science, cybersecurity, so on and so forth, a similar flow down. So if I know this stuff up here, then from there I can extrapolate everything I need to know down here. I don't need to know all of this if I can derive it from here. And part of the problem is so many people don't have the foundation here to derive here. And when we talk, for example, about countries and what countries are better at one thing or the other, if you know certain things about different countries, you can derive great facts. So if I know, for example, that a country oppresses anyone with a different opinion, then I can state emphatically, and I will more likely to not be right, that said country also lacks creative thinking. Said country also lacks reasoning skills, because that culture actually teaches them not to use their head and instead to just regurgitate information. That would be China. And it's not just China. There are actually a number of countries that fall in that loop. And but at the same time, if I go through and I say, well, I have a country here where they teach everyone to question everything, and I mean everything, but then you run into the same problem, but for a different reason, because instead everyone questions everything to the point where nothing is true. And that, by the way, also would describe China from the standpoint of they question everyone around them's motives and everything that everyone says, but they only do it in here because they're not allowed to say it. And the reason why they do it in here is because they're always questioning, am I going to get turned in? Did this person say something wrong? Do I need to turn this person in? And if I don't turn them in, then I get in trouble, so on and so forth. That's, yes, I know everything always goes back to Hitler and the Nazis. This is going to be the second time I'm going to bring them up. But that's actually what the Nazis did. It was incredibly effective. It worked very well. That was one of the big things with the Hitler Youth, right? Well, China, unlike the Nazis, have had many decades to really reinforce this. So has North Korea. And if you look, both China and North Korea are relatively stagnant as these things go. And they're not innovating. It's not happening. We see here in the United States pockets of similar thinking. Pockets where, one gentleman we worked with, he questioned everything. Actually, two gentlemen. Yeah. And it didn't matter if you had proof and showed it to him, he still questioned it. Showed him a proof of concept, and he pitched a fit because I wouldn't give it to him. I'm not going to give him a proof of concept. First of all, I showed him enough, he should be able to create it. Secondly, there are enough resources online, he should have been able to recreate it. Thirdly, he didn't understand the fundamentals, so I'm not going to give him something and turn him into a script kiddie. And fourth, I didn't trust him. I'm not going to give it to him.
Yeah, even if you would have gave him your code, they could have used that against you or used that to say that he wrote it. Right. Which goes back to that individual, like I was saying, that I was trying to teach that person how things actually work and in this space. And, he didn't get it. And he said it wasn't right. Remember, he came to you and said that, he thinks he knows everything and this is not how it is. And I think, I'm such better and I could do that. But then turns out using the same skill or same tactic I showed him, and trying to show off. And that was the same thing. Like you give somebody something, and especially if they're a script kiddie and they don't understand it, they're going to use it eventually anyway because they still don't understand it and they just want that glory.
Right.
And that's what they are. This, and a lot of people in this industry, people don't really want to say it, or maybe they're scared, but a lot of the people in this industry are script kiddies. They're not real hackers, they just started hacking and they get in this field and they're like, oh, I'm a hacker, or I'm a consultant and I'm a contractor, and can't do none of it. And it bothers the crap out of me because you get these certifications. I have this long list of certifications. I did this and that and that and that. So that justifies me to be a hacker. That doesn't justify shit. It just justifies that you knew how to take a test. And that doesn't mean you can hack shit. And you see that all the time. And it really grinds my gears because it doesn't prove a damn thing. It goes back to saying that if you've never done it on that side, you cannot come and tell me that you can hack. Anybody can pick up a tool and unscrew something. Anybody can screw things and screw it and put it back together, but that doesn't mean you know how it works, and doesn't mean you know how to really do it.
Well, and to your point, so I knew, well, first and foremost, by the way, China is a country filled with Skript kiddies, so is North Korea.
Yeah.
And anyone who knows how China, people say, oh, well, China has all of these security professionals. Yes, they do, but China is taking the typical Chinese approach, and those people are really bad at their job. So China is big on, if you throw enough bodies at it, we'll make it work. And that was China during the Korean War. That was China when they fought with Vietnam. And by the way, they lost in Vietnam. They lost to Vietnam. And so interestingly enough, the United States' approach is, well, we're going to take a few people who are just very good. Now, here's part of the problem is, unfortunately, the United States' model since the 1980s, as we discussed, since Reagan's big pushing of contractors, those two things collide and conflict in a very bad way. When I have just a few people, but now I need tons of people because we've created this artificial problem, this artificial shortage, then, I mean, what do I do? So the United States is trying to switch over to a more Chinese, more Soviet model of throwing bodies at it. And that's honestly the wrong approach. It won't work. But
yeah.
But interestingly enough, what people don't understand is if I give you something and you use it, and you use it either accidentally and do great damage or purposefully and do great damage, I'm now responsible for what you did. Of course, so you teach martial arts.
Yep.
As do I. And one of the most important things is to select your students and make sure that you teach them what you know they will be responsible with. And a lot of people don't understand that. So I can teach anyone martial arts, and eventually at some point they would be okay at it, if nothing else. Hopefully they'd be good, but some people just don't have the interest in the natural talent, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot that comes in to make a truly good student. A lot. And even if they really want to know, that doesn't mean that they have the natural skills required. But there are plenty of people I would not teach much, if any, martial arts do, because I would be afraid that they may try to show off and either hurt themselves or someone else, or that they then misapply that and use these skills in a situation where they are harming other people when they don't need to. I had a guy who bragged about how he got in X number of fights, and every time the other guy was so bloody, it wasn't funny, and I won. And I just sat there listening to it, and I was disgusted, and I'm going, if you were really good at martial arts, you wouldn't have gotten into those stupid fights. But even if you had gotten into those stupid fights because you were cornered, so I've gotten into some where there was no choice because it was actual self-defense. In those particular cases, there was no blood. In all my self-defense fights, there was no blood. 0. And I won every one of them. Now, I've only had 4. And why have I only had 4? There's a lot to it. Number one, not many people have been dumb enough to start a fight with me. And number 2, there hasn't generally been much reason for someone to start a fight with me. But, you've got these people who are hotheads, and you can't trust them. And the same is true in security. There are a lot of people I will not teach. I won't teach, or I will only teach a little bit because I don't know what they're going to do. And so if someone might sit there and say, well, but DaRon, you guys have put up videos where you're showing people how to do things. And that's true. And that would be a just claim, except while what we are showing is different than what you're going to see elsewhere, at the same time, what we're showing still requires you to have a modicum of technical skill. You have to be able to read code. You have to be able to write code. You have to be able to understand these attacks, because otherwise you're not going to be able to do anything. You couldn't just open up a tool and run it. It's not autopilot.
And you're not showing code. Like, I mean, you are showing some code, but you're not showing the proof of concept that I've seen in like crazy in these videos. Like,
yeah,
like you would do. You know what I'm saying?
I'm not showing what I actually use.
Yeah. You're not showing your stuff, but you're giving a demo. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And it's the difference, because and that's what people got to understand. That was another reason why it's hard to put out your proof of concepts online. Because somebody's easily able to come and take that and use it without really knowing what's going on, and who's in trouble for it? The person who wrote it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're showing different knowledge, different techniques, different stuff that's not new, but just to open people's mindset to different things you can actually do with these different attacks that you may not know that you don't get online, which is part of the problem. There's not a lot of things like you went over regex injection. All you see online is redos. You see regex, injection doing DOS attacks. You don't see anything else, so it pretty much makes the society ignorant to what are the things you can do, because that's all you see, especially if you're searching for this information. And if you think about books nowadays, you don't get that data.
Right.
I bought 2 books that had the same exact shit in it. And I'm just like, I literally spent $30 to $40 on the same exact shit, and they didn't teach me nothing different.
Books in our industry are so horrible. I've had a lot of people sit there and they ask me, oh, well, what books would you suggest I read in order to learn more about this field, or to get into it, or, get to where you are, things of that nature? And I always tell them, look, honestly, the books in our field are horrible. There are only 2 books I would suggest. And the first is from 2012. And that's, of course, Hacking Exposed, and not the branch offs. But Hacking Exposed, if you get Hacking Exposed, that is a fantastic, fantastic book. The second is the Hacker Playbook. And that's just very well written. It's very well written. But I'll tell you, neither of those will make you particularly great. Neither of those will make you probably even good. What those should do is feed some of that curiosity and do so in a digestible manner. But our field, there are no good textbooks, and there are no good, if you will, regular books, so non-academic books. They just don't exist. And I have so many books, my wife threatens to get rid of them all the time, because I like books and I like to read. No. Cybersecurity, the books are garbage. They're terrible.
And that's why I always tell people it's better to do, go online. I don't like to say CTF, but start off with a little CTF, if you have to. I mean, especially because most people don't really know, so you can play around. But what I used to do is build my own system.
Yeah.
I didn't really like CTF, but I normally tell people, because they don't know how to build anything. So I say, start off with a CTF, understand the server, start reading some, fundamental stuff on Linux, and getting these books to understand how system administrators do things, network administrators do things, if you can't get a job, so you can understand how to build your own server. If you don't understand how to read code and how it's written, then how can you understand how to do it? Like, all servers are, not saying the hardware, but they all have an underlying code. So what I used to tell people is, like, understand these things. You got to understand how software developers do their thing. You got to understand how Linux admins do their thing, system admins, all of it, even though they may all be some crap sometime, not Linux people, but you got to understand all these ecosystems in order to be able to hack them. So that was my thing. And I would build my own systems and to hack my own systems because I hate CTF. But I always just tell people, if you don't have a good start, there's better to start somewhere than not to start at all. And that's the problem. They never start.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're exactly right. What you have to do is you really do have to build your own stuff, because in order to understand it, in order to understand the attacks and the defense side of it, you have to understand how it works. And you have to also have curiosity and play. And that goes to, I know, CTS. And I always cringe. I hate capture the flags.
No, me too. But we talked about that.
We did. They're all the same. They're all the same. And really, in their case, it's not only never realistic, but it also is so scripted that if you just know how they work in general, you should be able to win and break any CTF so quickly it's not funny. And none of them are even semi-realistic. But going back to an interesting earlier point, so you know all those people and they have like certifications or their degrees and all this stuff and their signature, email signature and all over everything else. I'll tell you, I've never liked that kind of thing. So to me, what that has always signaled to me is that your accomplishments have been so unnoticeable that rather than standing on those accomplishments, you have to stand on certifications and degrees. And I know someone's going to say, but it was so much work to get a degree, a PhD, for example. And yes, that takes commitment and that takes time, and that's all well and good. But the truth is, PhDs, for the most part, actually teach you how to do research and then synthesize the data in a meaningful way and with new interpretations. PhDs don't make you the expert on a subject that people think they do. It's not what a PhD is actually for. And you'll see the same thing with masters. Masters are actually just pre-PhDs. They tell you whether or not you have what it takes and you have the desire to do a PhD. But that's a different matter. The long and short of it being, your accomplishments after your PhD should be what you should be touting. When I see a resume and the first thing is the education, that tells me you have no meaningful work history. Yeah. When I see a signature and I see your degrees and certifications, that tells me you have no meaningful work history. For the same exact reason. Because if you had meaningful work history, you wouldn't need to. It's again, insecurity. It also signals to me that your accomplishments just haven't done much. Great example. There are a large number of people within both the military and the R&D side of it, etc., but also within the civilian side, who, if you sort of described me, you didn't even have to say my name, they'd know exactly who you're talking about. And I have a lot of nicknames to include, I'll give you a good one, the Man in Black, because I always wear black. Okay. I know that surprises you so much.
We both wear black all the time.
I know. Yeah. See, and there are a lot of reasons why I wear black, and maybe we'll talk about those someday. But when people sit there and they talk about me, they talk about the Man in Black or things of that nature. And a lot of people don't know my name, but they know my deeds. And they know my deeds, and they know my deeds based on not only what I did, but also because they'll know one of those monikers that whatever that particular group, and different groups have different monikers for me, whatever that moniker happens to be for me. And I'll have no idea who these people are. And they'll be like, oh, it's the Man in Black, da da da. And then they'll start up a conversation. I have no clue who they are. I've never met them before in my life. And you're talking about thousands of people working on an installation. And everyone knows me or knows my work and knows my moniker. And then you go to a different installation somewhere else in a completely different organization. It's the same exact thing. And I guess part of it is because I'm memorable. I don't know.
You always wearing black.
I am
what the
always
hell,
wearing black.
Ron?
That's right.
The hell. You can't miss it.
That's right. Well, and I also have a black military trench coat that I wore for many, many years.
Are you the Matrix? Were you the Matrix?
Well, the real problem is, all right, so if I start growing on my beard and stuff, then you want to talk about getting labeled as a terrorist and a threat. Try wearing all black and a black trench coat, a nice long black military trench coat, and having a beard.
I know where that comes from. I know where that's gone. I know where that's gone.
So really what people need to do in general within our field is understand that once you become an expert, you don't have to have this constant measuring contest. So when I was doing R&D stuff for the military and then for NASA, so helping NASA, for example, with the next generation spacesuits, helping the military with advanced weapons systems, so advanced fighters, bombers, tanks, ships of all kinds, things of that nature, as well as firearms. Nobody ever mentioned the fact that I don't have a PhD. Nobody actually asked me what degree I have. I never once got asked what degree or what degree level. Didn't happen. You know why? Because everyone respected what I said. They knew I knew what I was talking about. I didn't have my, degree in my signature. If I actually did, people probably would have given me a good ribbing for it. But I was working with the entire groups. Everyone had masters and above. And then I had other groups where they all had PhDs. And I was the only one. And I'm just sitting there with a bachelor's. Now, I have almost completed a master's program, but I stopped because I wasn't satisfied with the quality of education coming from it. But it's not relevant. And yet, here we're talking about a guy who has gone through, and I've written this special publications, actual National Institute Standards and Technology special publications that everyone has to follow. I've helped write federal law. I've helped write DoD policies, directives, etc., NASA policies, directives. I've written for the IAEA, for governments all around the world. And I do training for the military, militaries, and all of this other stuff. And I have a bachelor's.
Yeah, that speaks volume. And that's what I said. Like, I feel like you shouldn't let your certification or anything speak for you. You should let your work speak for itself. And that's me. Like, I don't have to have show my bachelor, and I don't have to have these certifications, and I don't believe in them. But I feel like my work speaks for itself. If you know me or seen my work, then you know that, it's going to speak for itself. I'm good at what I do, and I pride myself for that. And I don't, certification or degree doesn't make me. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and to that exact point, so, in all my years doing forensics, excluding special courts, we're not going to talk about the classified courts. As far as the public courts are concerned, I've never once had to go and testify in court. You know why?
Why?
Every single time the opposition, it doesn't matter if it's the government or the other side, they get my report, they read my report.
They already know.
And it's done. It's done. They always settle. Or just admit guilt. Every single time.
We after they see your work, you already know. Like, he did all his work and research and got all of the stuff. So there's nothing you can say. There's nothing you miss.
That's right. I don't need to go to court because it's not going to go to court. And you have all these people who brag about how many times they've been in court, giving expert witness testimony. I'm like, you had to give that because your report sucked. And because what you wrote was so questionable that either side, so the opposition side, be they the defense or the prosecutor, felt like they had a chance. And that just means you're bad at your job. I'm being honest here. You're bad at your job because, I've had people. I had a guy. It was a pedophile case. I don't like pedophile cases. I do not like to do those. I stay away from those like the plague. I hate those. Because as a father, it's very hard for me to not be biased. And one of the most important things about being an investigator is not being biased. When you come into it already assuming one way or the other, your investigation is going to be tainted and it's just going to be bunk. Absolute bunk. So as a father, as someone who has a history with child sexual abuse and things of that nature, with some of the loved ones, things of that nature, I cannot be unbiased. But I had this gentleman in a pedophile case, and he sat there and he asked if we would look at his system, and I told him, yes, we will gladly look at your system. And I said, I will let you know right here, right now, that our report goes to both sides. And if our report shows that you, in fact, downloaded those files and so on and so forth, then it will reflect that, and the prosecutor will get that. You want to guess whether or not we picked him up as a client? He went elsewhere.
Yeah, I knew it. He went elsewhere because he already knew.
He already knew. I mean, and he openly admitted, he said, look, I had a problem and all this other stuff. So I don't know why he was coming to us, because he admitted he had a problem. So why are you coming to us? I mean,
because he wanted you guys to find some ways to get him out of it and pretty much wipe away his stuff.
Exactly. And I actually know of a guy in this area. You pay him $500 and he's going to spend the whole time throwing shade at everything. He'll say, oh, well, anyone could have downloaded that. Anyone could have put that on there. But all this other stuff. And yes, there are cases. I've told you, I have had cases where evidence was in fact either tampered with or placed. Right? Planted. And I have had those and legitimate instances of that. But this guy will say it for everything. All you have to do is pass him $500. And he constantly is a thorn in the side for prosecution of pedophiles in our area, and has gotten quite a few off through this. That's disgusting to me.
Well, we can save that for another episode. Yes. I mean, that is some crazy stuff, but it would be nice to have a story time to, it's things that you could talk about, so people can understand a little bit more about the forensic cases and a little bit more about forensic in general, because a lot of people think that they understand what forensics is and then don't really know what computer forensics is. So that would be a nice topic to touch on one time. But just to break down the points that we talked about today, do you want to break down a few points that people should understand about the topic we talked about today?
Sure. So first and foremost, if you want to talk about real threats to the United States, Russian organized crime, Turkey, specifically their organized crime, the Russian state, and then, of course, Iran. And ignore China. China isn't the threat everyone pretends it is. If China were that threat, Taiwan would not exist, and Japan would have already gotten what China feels is their comeuppance. I would argue that's wrong, but that's a different matter. What the Japanese did obviously was horrible, but what the Chinese are going to do to the Japanese is going to be just as bad. And that two wrongs don't make a right. So ignore China, ignore North Korea. And when I say ignore, I don't mean, write them off. What I mean is they're not the major threat you should be concerned with. Yes, they have been compromising systems, but they've been doing what they always do, which is script kiddie compromises. Their stuff's not sophisticated. And most of the compromises occur because people aren't patching known vulnerabilities. They're not like the Russians going through and exploiting unknown vulnerabilities like Matt. The Chinese in general buy their stuff from the Russians and from other places. They aren't coming up with it. And when they do come up with it, it's extremely rare. Most of what they use is already out there. Most of it. And there's no excuse for most of the compromises out there from the Chinese. You need to focus instead on the Russians. And if you're a security expert and you're even semi worth your soul, you already know this. If you're new to the field, please take my advice. Focus on what the Russians are doing. Focus on the Iranians. Focus on the Turks. if you aren't worth your salt, let's say you're a certain security investigative reporter, who a lot of people talk about, either one of them, then you're going to probably continue your saber rattling and drone on about China and the mythical Chinese beast. But China right now isn't the problem, and you have real threats. I would focus on your real threats today over your potential threats 20 to 30 years from now. Because that's about how long it's going to take the Chinese to really get it in gear. The other piece I would say is, as far as military is concerned, China is not a military threat. I don't care who you are. The Chinese aren't a military threat. Not right now. They are maybe bothersome. What they're doing is a lot of posturing. And yes, you do need to monitor that. But we have to be careful not to go to war, because even though it's a war that China would not do well in, it would be an ugly thing. And we really need to ramp things down. There's no need for this constant jingoism, saber rattling, and all this chicken hawkery that you see going on.
So, long story short, if you don't know your facts or don't have your facts straight, shut up. That's it. Plain and simple. Don't do it to yourself. If you don't have the facts straight, shut up. And if you don't know something, it's okay not to know it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's okay. Everybody has to learn something. You don't block people just because you don't know something. It's okay. It's all right.
Yeah,
everybody's feelings get hurt. It's okay. It happens all the time, but that shows your maturity and how immature you are in this field. And I just think that everybody has to learn from somebody. And it doesn't make you look bad. You know what I'm saying? It just shows that you're trying to grow. So with that being said, thank you guys for tuning into this episode. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Roniel and DaRon podcast show. And until the next time, I'm Roniel.
I'm DaRon.
Have a good one.
Have fun.